Hello, welcome to another Master Gardener moment here from Dubuque County Master Gardeners. My name is Jackie Kehr, and today we're going to be talking about planting prairie plugs, or native plant plugs. This video is specifically for the members of our program called Mowing to Monarchs, and this group of people is receiving prairie plugs, similar to the one in this tray here, to plant in their sunny lawns. But if you order native plant plugs or prairie plugs from an online nursery, this information will also be applicable to you. So we're going to talk a little bit today about what to do once you receive the plants, and this is especially important if you receive those from the mail ordering them online, but also to our members. And then we're going to discuss how to plant them in the ground and get them properly watered to set you up for success this year. So first, let's discuss what to do once your plants arrive, whether that is getting them through our program or getting them from the mail. In both of those instances, they might not be fully hydrated. And we want to make sure that they're fully hydrated, that the soil is moist, and those roots are ready to really start a new life in the ground. So once you receive your plants, whether that's in the mail or you pick them up from us, first I want you to fully hydrate them, and this is how. You want to get a bucket. Here we have just a clear thing so that you can actually see a clear vase. So your plug might be this size. I'm going to show you with a smaller plant that needs to be hydrated. You want to take that and maybe hold onto the soil surface and then submerge it, and you can do multiple at a time, and you'll know that it's not fully hydrated by a few obvious ways. This one's a little curly leaf, so you can tell, but also it's going to float if you let it go. You don't have to let it go because there is air in the soil, so you can submerge the whole, not the whole plant, but the whole pot, and maybe hold down the soil in there to just keep it underwater, and you'll watch bubbles come up. Once those bubbles stop and it sort of becomes neutrally buoyant in the bucket or sinks to the bottom, you'll know that it's nice and hydrated. Once that is the case, and you can do multiple at the same time, you can pull them out, let the water drain, and then put it in some sort of container that has holes in the bottom so that that water can drain out. I would suggest hydrating immediately once you receive the plants, and then you can keep them moist until you're ready to plant. If you hydrate and you want to plant soon, maybe hydrate one day and the next morning you can start your planting out, or afternoon, depending. This here is a very common tray that you might get your plugs in, and it actually comes with holes in the bottom, so you could do something like that, is just set it out, and you'll want to store them in a shady location, such as under a bush or under a tree, so they're not in direct sunlight, and then they completely dry out again before you're ready to plant. Once you have your plants hydrated, they're staying moist, then we can discuss how to move on and actually get those plants in the ground. So now let's transition to actually getting these plants in the ground. It's planting day. Hopefully you have some sort of prepared space. A lot of our Mowing to Monarchs members probably have their mulch down already and have killed off the turf grass, which is key. If you have any additional weeds, now would be the time to sort of dig them up and get them out of the way. But the first thing we want to do is remove the mulch. Okay? I have my plant markers here that I had spaced to lay out my whole bed, and I'm only going to plant a few plants at a time so that I don't get lost and I make sure I know where everything goes. So I'm going to pull out the stake. This was just a little marker. What I want to plant right here is a butterfly milkweed. I'm going to move all of the mulch off the top until I get to the dirt. And I'm going to kind of get it out of the way. There's a weed coming up. Until I get to my bare soil. And now I'm going to have my mulch in one pile and I'm going to put my soil in another pile, so that when I fill the hole in at the end, I'm making sure that I'm using the soil and not the mulch. That's sort of just a little tip that I have. I'm going to dig with a trowel, just a skinny trowel. You can also dig with one of these bulb augers if you would like, if you have one. And if you're doing a large area, that might be more useful. And we can show how to use that in a little while. But that might be another option for you. I'm going to dig by hand because I don't mind that. My soil is relatively moist today. Yours might not be. And if your soil is not moist, you might need to pay a little extra attention to hydration while you're planting. I'm going to go ahead and dig a hole. I want it to be about an inch wider and an inch or so deeper. than the actual plug. And the way that I measure that is that I take the pot and I pop it in there. Now I'm going to want the soil level of the plant here to be just below or right at the surface of the original soil. So I'm going to pop it down in there. I'm a little bit lower, but I'm going to dig a slight bit more out of the bottom. And that's really just to loosen up the soil. And if any of my mulch falls in, pull that out. Okay, so now my hole is about an inch deeper than the pot. And I'm going to backfill, again making sure I'm filling with the dirt, okay, with the soil. And I'm going to break it up. This is nice texture. It might be harder if your soil isn't so moist. And I'm going to fill it back in at the bottom for that inch or so until we're just about even with the soil line. Okay. At that point, I'm ready to take the plug out. Now there are a few things to pay attention to when we're taking a plug out of the pot. These are not fairy plants, but they show the root systems, and that's what we want to pay attention to. First of all, the process of pulling the plug or any plant out of one of these containers, one of these plastic containers, I want you to make sure you don't play with the top too much. And feel free to cut away the plastic if that's easier for you. One of the easiest ways for me is that I take 2 fingers and I lay them on the soil surface. And then I turn the pot upside down and I tap it. And if it's not too moist, it will fall out. And that's what's the case with this right here. Now, this would be what you would ideally see in your prairie plugs. It might not be the case. There are long roots going all the way down to the bottom, and that's probably what you're going to see with a lot of your prairie plugs. This is perfect. You don't want to disturb those roots. You don't need to do anything at this point. They are ready to go in the ground just as they are. It unfortunately won't always be the case. Sometimes there won't be a lot of roots and some of the soil will crumble away. That's okay. Just try to hold on to the mass of it while you're holding it where there is still some soil there. Again, leaving the greens to go without damaging them too much because they're pretty sensitive. And so you would be able to sort of hold that and get that in the soil. So this would be a good root structure. Let me show you something that might not be as great. This root structure in this plant here, you can see that it's really starting to build up on the bottom, and it might even start coiling around. And if that's the case, you could take a serrated knife. If the coils are really only on the bottom, you can shave some of those off. You can cut a little bit like this, or even sort of break down the side and sort of cut some of those. The point being that you don't want them spiraling, and you want to break up that little mass at the bottom. And that's going to help your roots really establish and get down, rather than they will continue to do that coil if that's the case. And with some of our plugs we might see that. So you can shave off those really coiled ones on the bottom, or do some serrated cutting gently across the bottom. And that will really set you up for success. But let's get back to the plug that we can actually get planted today. These were just some examples for you to look at those roots. Again, we want to be extremely careful with the tops, okay? And hopefully with properly hydrated soil, not too wet, not too dry, we should be able to get this out without too much of a problem. I'm going to rest my hands on the top, so I hold onto the soil, not onto the plant, and then I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to tap, and maybe I'm going to gently squeeze a little bit, maybe shake it, there we go. And then pull it out. And you can see this is absolutely beautiful. Roots coming down. They're not coiling on the bottom. We have some roots coming out the bottom, so I can hold on to this without it crumbling. And that's awesome. Hopefully everyone you plant is like this. We're going to set it down into our hole, which we already know is the right depth because we tested before we got anything out. So this nice crumbly soil all the way around without really having any air pockets. So I'm going to just gently kind of press in, not pound in there. And I'm going to make sure I don't get any of my soil or my mulch pile in there. So we're going to fill around and create a nice covering for this milkweed. And once I have, you can see I sort of have an indentation in here. I am going to water. It's easiest to water and best for the plants to water around the soil and not to water spraying over top, especially this very baby sensitive plant. So we're going to put some water around, and as we let that soak in, okay, we might notice that there's some settling that occurs, and we'll have to fill in a little bit around there. Now it's a little bit sloppy. Now my soil, you can tell, was very moist to start with. If my soil was not moist and it was at all dry, I would have pre-watered the hole. I would have actually dumped some water into the hole, let it soak in before I put my plant in there. But it's a nice planting day, so I didn't think about that. You can tell that I have a little bit of a dish here, where it goes down a little bit, maybe a ½ inch max. And we want that so that the water will congregate around that when it rains and when you're doing some watering. Once you're settled in, there aren't major gaps, and the water is percolating nicely, you can put your mulch back around. We do not want to mulch within 2 to 3 inches of that prairie plug, especially this first year. We want to keep the mulch back so that we have that nice little indentation in that well to help draw the water in and soak down through the hole and draw the roots downward as it's starting to establish. And that should set you up for this planting, and you can move on to the next. I highly encourage, again, you just do a couple at a time, maybe like 3 of the same type of plant, especially if you're doing a large planting. But I hope this will help you get established with your prairie this early summer or spring. The other option, if you don't want to dig by hand, is to use one of these bulb augers. So here's another location where we need a hole. So I'm going to start again by removing all the mulch, and this is going to be difficult. Removing all the mulch until we're down to bare earth. You see this white stuff, no fear, that is just the underground part of some fungi, making your soil happy. Okay, so I'm going to keep my mulch separate so we can again come back to that at the end. Somewhere in here is our location. You also want to make sure to make your hole a little bit wider because we want it to be about 1 inch wider than the plug. So you can do a little bit of a wobble motion to get that. And you need to make sure you pay attention to your depth. This auger is a little bit deeper than one of our plugs, but depending on your auger specifically, make sure you're making a hole the correct size. It's always a great idea to go ahead and put a plant stake of some sort, identifying your different plants. This will be important for maintenance, for watching for specific insects, and really important for next spring when you want to know what's coming up. So highly suggest labeling and then move on to the next, and you'll have quite a few to do if you're part of the Mowing to Monarchs program, and we hope this will set you up for success for this year. Thank you so much for joining us on this Master Gardener moment.